Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Darth Vader is a fearsome foe. When he appears on screen, he is a force of nature that makes even the most stoic Jedi cower in fear. But unbeknownst to many in the galaxy, the enforcer of Emperor Palpatine was once the Jedi Knight and Clone Wars hero known as Anakin Skywalker. Widely considered by many in the Jedi Council as the Chosen One, he was originally identified on Tatooine by the patron saint of trafficked daughters, Qui-Gon Jinn. The Jedi had administered a blood test and detected a massive amount of midichlorians in the young slave's body. The question that I have for you guys today has been debated by fans for decades, if not centuries, or thousands of years probably. And that's whether Anakin Skywalker would be able to defeat his Sith version of himself, Darth Vader. Today we're going to be breaking down this video into three different categories. We're going to take a look at the toll Anakin's injuries on Mustafar have on his body. Then we're going to take a look at Darth Vader's switch to the Darkside and how that affects his fighting abilities. And the third part is about sand? Oh no, it's about how his lightsaber form changes because of his armor. Alright, let's continue. In order to truly understand the difference between Anakin Skywalker and Vader, we have to take a look at the physical toll his injuries had on him from the duel on Mustafar. When Obi-Wan Kenobi warned Anakin Skywalker that he had the high ground, it was a very clear warning to Anakin, something that he should have heeded. Now, I do believe that Anakin Skywalker is probably the stronger swordsman and force user in this situation. Plus, Obi-Wan Kenobi, during this entire duel, was fighting defensively. But this was always Obi-Wan's MO. He would fight defensively to buy himself time and a window of opportunity. And when he got the high ground, that was his opportunity. You gotta remember, Obi-Wan Kenobi knows his apprentice better than almost anyone, and so he knew exactly what Anakin would do in this case. He probably knew that Anakin was gonna jump before he even knew he was gonna jump. And this is because, as a young Padawan, Anakin would always disobey Obi-Wan. But here's the messed up thing. When Obi-Wan Kenobi strikes Anakin Skywalker, it's not just some regular strike. It's actually a specific finishing move called Muay Thai. And it's very Sith-oriented because the goal here is to decapitate... Is it decapitate? That's the head. It's to delimb the individual and hit as many limbs as possible with one strike. In this case, Obi-Wan Kenobi gets 3 limbs. Arm, leg, leg. In many ways, Obi-Wan Kenobi was the last person I'd imagine that would use this type of finisher, especially on Anakin.
You were my brother, Anakin! I loved you!
You see, Muay Thai is not just a devastating finisher move. The reason why it's so aligned to the Sith is because it's all about destroying your enemy both physically but also mentally, because if you don't have limbs anymore, you basically can't do anything. And from a Jedi's point of view, this type of attack is callous and caused unnecessary pain and suffering to the victim. Anakin Skywalker had gone through quite a lot in his life and would go through a lot more during the rest of his life, but this moment on Mustafar was by far one of his most devastating moments. He had lost his mother to Sand People, he had lost his father figure to Maul, he had lost his connection to the entire Jedi Order by joining Palpatine, and he feared the loss of his wife. But this devastating injury was carried out by the last person Anakin truly had in his life. You see, Obi-Wan Kenobi was more than just a mentor, he was his brother, his family. And now Anakin literally was limbless and unable to move. His body had landed just meters away from a river of lava, and the fumes and heat were already beginning to choke him. Eventually, Anakin's body would be engulfed in flames from the background heat, causing horrendous burns all across his body, but also destroying his respiratory system. Obi-Wan's actions here are incredibly cruel, not only because he uses this Sith-oriented finishing move on Anakin, but also because he just basically walks away. He doesn't remove Anakin to a back-to-tank where he could heal. He doesn't even try to remove Anakin from the banks of this lava river. He doesn't even do the merciful thing, which would have been to just put him out of his misery. Instead, he allows Anakin to just lie there in pain and horror, and essentially he delivers Anakin straight back to Darth Sidious because of this. In my opinion, this marks the true transformation of Anakin Skywalker to Sith Lord. Prior to this, he was just a dark Jedi who had made an emotional decision to save Palpatine from Mace Windu. which is a position that a lot of us have actually been in. Like, you know, you have two of your bosses fighting each other, and you decide to chop off one of their arms because you like the other one more. Relatable. At this point in time, Anakin's spirit and mind were still conflicted. He had not truly fallen to the dark side. He still had hope, which is important. He had hope that his wife would survive. He had hope that he could live with her and have a normal life, something that the Jedi had denied him. Now, there are some theories out there that says that because Anakin Skywalker lost his legs and blood, then technically he should have also lost a lot of midichlorians and therefore have a lower midichlorian count. And this is possible, but I personally don't believe this theory, and judging by how heavily dependent Vader is on the Force decades after his injury, I would say that he is still very powerful when it comes to midichlorians. There are even reports saying that Vader was tested after his injuries and still had similarly high density in midichlorians. It should also be mentioned that midichlorians are not the sole determining factor in how powerful a Force user is. You should think about midichlorians as more as a maximum bandwidth rather than Force powers itself. And most of the less experienced Force users don't even get close to their maximum bandwidth when it comes to Force powers. This is why you have individuals like Yoda, who might have a lower midichlorian count than Anakin, but is far more powerful in the Force because he is a lot more efficient at using his midichlorians to communicate with the Force. Now, one of the biggest limitations that many young Force users have are psychological. If they aren't able to focus or properly embrace the Force or be confident in their own abilities, they might suffer severe setbacks. Also, it's said that Darth Vader's injuries were extremely gruesome, and that Darth Sidious didn't really spend that much money or effort on making sure he recovered properly, and so he actually had to use a massive amount of Force to keep himself alive, and this was in addition to that life support system. And if someone were able to damage his life support system, then Vader had to use the Force even more heavily to stay alive. And so this is a huge liability for him. Also, Vader's mechanical limbs were said to be clunky and not very flexible, and also had a bit of lag when it came to input. We'll talk more later about how that affects his lightsaber combat style. But the point here is Vader was extremely reliant on his suit of armor. Without it, he was quite vulnerable. At the same time, with Vader being more machine than man, he was now able to take a lot more damage without necessarily suffering that much trauma. Losing an arm or leg was essentially painless for him, because he didn't have real arms or legs anymore. Another major change is Vader's own behavior. After his injury, he's become a little bit more patient. He doesn't really run headfirst into things without thinking anymore. As a matter of fact, we've seen Darth Vader let several foes just essentially run away, as if he's not worried about catching up with them later on. This is something that the old Anakin would have never done. The Jedi and Sith were both wrong about the Force, especially their interpretation of the light and dark side. They were both way too extreme, and they just didn't understand the other side very well. The reality is everyone has both dark and light side tendencies, and that both sides of the Force has varying uses and also overlapping uses. An individual like Anakin Skywalker had a very high midichlorian count, which meant his potential for a connection to the Force was massive. But I would argue that he naturally is an individual who is more oriented to the dark side. Light side Force users like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda became immensely powerful by becoming emotionally calm and in tune with the light side energies around them. They found peace in a vortex of chaos, and this tuned them into the natural cosmic Force and allowed them to become pure conduits of the light side. When Yoda was channeling the Force at full potential in his lightsaber duel with Palpatine, he clearly has the upper hand here. His speed and striking power is phenomenal. As a matter of fact, if he goes any faster, he'll probably just turn into a Force ghost, disappear, and control his lightsaber from way beyond. This is why, in theory, the light side or complete adherence to the light side can be far more powerful than the destructive dark side. You see, Palpatine, on the other hand, like all other Sith, use their emotions and other individuals' emotions around them to feed the dark side within them. This is far more destructive and runs counter to the nature of the Force and the galaxy. Instead of being in tune with everything, Darksiders basically rip the Force apart and try to bend it towards their will. Sometimes there's enough friction that Sith lightning emerges from their fingertips. Now, Palpatine is only able to survive his encounter with Yoda by disrupting Yoda's flow with some Force powers. Otherwise, were they fighting a pure duel, he would have lost. This is also why Sith Force users would routinely taunt their Jedi opponents in order to basically mentally make them unbalanced, which will lead to mistakes. Now, Anakin Skywalker, especially in his pre-Vader form, is unable to really take full advantage of the light side of the Force, and that's because he had no internal peace. Not only did he suffer quite a lot, this also led to some severe attachment issues he harbored, and he never truly felt like he fit anywhere as well. The Jedi should have known that Anakin Skywalker was leaning more towards the dark side, and they should have made more attempts to help him fit in with the Jedi Order instead of making him feel like an outcast. And this is what really affects his Jedi training. One needs to be at peace with himself before he can be at peace with the Force. But of course, Anakin Skywalker was a tenacious student, and he quickly turned into one of the most skilled duelists through sheer determination and practice. But when Anakin engaged in lightsaber combat, the light side still held him back. Anakin was always at his most powerful and fearsome during the Clone Wars. This was when he let the dark side take over. Whether it was his duel with Asajj Ventress on Yavin 4, or his destruction of that Tusken Raider village, or his defeat of Count Dooku, Anakin always seemed more powerful when he fought with emotions. And so it's my belief that Anakin's combat prowess increased because of his state of mind when he joined the dark side. We also have to remember that the trauma he suffered from Mustafar only made him more angry, and it was said that the Dark Lord was in constant pain from his injuries, and so he would be able to draw on that infinite reservoir of anger and hate for even more Force powers. Anakin Skywalker was very much a complete warrior during the Clone Wars. He had speed, strength, potato, and skill, and was also quite potent when it came to his Force powers. He primarily used Form 5 Xian and Gem So, which was an enhancement of Form 3's more defensive shell technique. What it added was more aggressive and powerful offensive strikes. When Anakin became Darth Vader, he had to significantly change up his lightsaber combat style, mainly because of his injuries and because of this new suit of armor he was wearing. He no longer had the same speed, precision, and dexterity because of the changes to his body, and as we've seen in some of Vader's early battles, he actually takes quite a lot of damage and is almost defeated on several occasions because of this. Vader post-surgery seems to rely much more on power strikes rather than speed, form, or counterattacking. When he's fighting, it almost feels like he's trying to break through an opponent's lightsaber rather than outsmarting them with good technique. There's also an increased reliance here by Vader on using the Force, either to immobilize enemies or just outright snapping their necks. Now, this is one of the side effects and advantages of Vader falling to the dark side. Jedi just avoided using the Force too violently. And they definitely would try to avoid killing people directly with the Force. That was seen as like the ultimate perversion of the light side. On the other hand, Vader was a lot more patient and cautious than Anakin ever was. Anakin's impulsive behavior on Mustafar has definitely taught Vader some very important lessons about jumping headfirst into battle. A lesson that he didn't learn versus Count Dooku the first time he fought him. Ultimately, I believe that going to the dark side has made Darth Vader a lot more powerful in the Force than Anakin Skywalker was. Well, at least better connected to the Force. Vader is also a wiser individual who has a lot more experience fighting. But his injuries are extremely gruesome, and they do require him to constantly use the Force to maintain his own strength. This is a huge liability, and I think were Anakin to fight Darth Vader, he would have enough strength and speed to either avoid or deflect Vader's shots, and at the same time, I don't think Vader is fast enough to stop Anakin Skywalker from damaging him, and ultimately, I think Anakin would be able to disarm Darth Vader. And that's because, when pressed, Anakin Skywalker was just as relentless as Vader was. The one thing that Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, and many of the Jedi ignored and also lied to themselves about was the fact that Anakin had always been an emotional and angry individual, capable of great evil. Which is why, instead of trying to suppress that part of his personality, the Jedi should have found him an outlet or a healthy way to deal with his emotions, instead of making him feel like he was just the bad person and doing the wrong thing. And so, because Anakin is ruthless, he won't give Vader any openings that many other Jedi would. This is why I believe he is the stronger fighter. But let me know in the comment sections below what you think. I know there are a lot of different opinions on this subject matter. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. I look forward to reading your comments, and as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy, Anakin.